As you've heard on Bridge City News, Canada has banned flights from Great Britain over fears of a new strain of COVID-19 which may be easier to transmit. To talk about this in more detail is political reporter Brian Lilley joining me once again from Toronto. Brian, before we discuss flights, what have you really learned from federal medical officials about the new strain?
At this point, we don't know if the strain has shown up in Canada. What we do know is that it is easier to transmit. And we've all seen that sticky ball, the graphic that everyone uses for COVID-19, the ball with the little, suction cup type things coming out of it. And those, they say, are the proteins. And what we know about this new strain is that it's 70% stickier. The other day it was 60%. Now they're saying, oh, maybe 70% stickier. It's a lot easier to transmit. It's a lot easier for this strain to attach onto your body and infect you. So, do you necessarily get sicker? Are there worse outcomes? At this point, researchers, whether it's in Canada, where we don't know if the actual new strain has shown up, or in the UK or elsewhere, they don't know. We do know that the strain has shown up in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in Italy, in Australia. It's been floating around the UK since at least September, and now we're told that it accounts for more than 60% of cases in London, where, as we'll talk about in a minute, there have been a lot of flights coming from London to Canada over the last several weeks.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the banned flights. You've been looking at some of the data that should be a little concerning here, or some of the stats you came up with. We don't know how many or if any of the flights have already brought this new strain to Canada, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And look, it's very difficult to navigate each airport's website and figure out, okay, how many flights came from this city to that city on a given day. Some give you the day before, some just give you that day, some give you the day before, that day, and tomorrow. So, for example, Calgary, it's difficult to ascertain how many flights have shown up in the last couple of weeks from Calgary to London, but it doesn't appear that that was a thing. When we're talking about Vancouver, we're only talking about a few flights from London to Vancouver. But when we're talking about Toronto or Montreal, we're talking about 2 to 4 flights a day, depending on the city. Montreal, we're talking 2 flights a day, on a busy day 3. When we're talking about Toronto, we're talking about 3 to 4 flights a day. And those were happening up until midnight, Sunday into Monday. Okay, so, it always gets confusing when you say midnight Monday. Okay, are you talking midnight Sunday? You're talking, no, Sunday into Monday is when they banned the flights. There were 2 flights that arrived after that, both Air Canada flights. Both, I'm told, were regularly scheduled flights that came back because they were already in the UK. They flew back with just the crew. I'm told on one of the flights, maybe a bit of cargo, but no passengers, because they're just not sure about this. Now, it's only a 72-hour event, so that should end shortly. I expect this to be extended for a little while, as European countries are doing, as Israel's doing. The United States, not so much, but we're going to see an extension of this as we try and determine, is this a threat to Canada? Do we need to do more? But you know what? A lot of Canadians probably thought the borders were closed because we can't drive over to the United States. We've been told that we can't go to Florida, to Palm Springs, to Arizona, to Texas, anywhere that snowbirds would go. So why are we having all these international flights? Because the border never really closed.
Now, Brian, let's talk a bit about the vaccines for just a moment, whether it's Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna. How is Canada faring when it comes to acquiring new COVID-19 vaccines?
Well, we're still waiting on Moderna to be fully approved. And, within hours of that, we're told that we could start getting vaccines. Now, when I say hours, we're talking within 48 hours. So let's say, tomorrow morning we wake up, it is approved. Guess what? Within a couple days, we can start getting Moderna vaccines. But right now, we're still dealing with just the Pfizer vaccine. This is the most difficult vaccine to handle. So it depends on which province you're in and how, your province has decided to administer the vaccine. In Quebec, they decided we're going to do, long-term care residents first. And so they sent it to those locations. In Ontario, they said, we will do the long-term care employees, not the residents, because, as Ontario Premier Doug Ford keeps saying, It's not the residents that are bringing in the COVID-19. It's the employees that are out in the community. British Columbia, they've sent it to every single different health region. And in Alberta, they primarily focused on their main research hospitals and going out from there. So it's all going to depend. The simple fact of the matter is, though, we are trailing behind the Americans. So we've had about 25,000 people vaccinated in Canada. The Americans have had more than 500,000 vaccinated. Now, people will say, well, they're 10 times larger. Yes, but they are doing vaccinations at twice the rate that we are at this point. And, they've just approved Moderna. We have not. We can expect that to step up over the next little while. So the Americans are going to be vaccinating far more people and at a far greater rate than we are, which means they will get out of this bizarre COVID life we've all been leading faster than we will. That will end the lockdowns. That will end the restrictions. That will end everything that is making life much more difficult, especially as we head towards Christmas at the end of this week.
Brian, during one of his year-end interviews, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made mention of a potential election in 2021. Now, let me ask you something. Was this just a bit of a slip? Are we actually going to the polls next year?
At this point, we don't know. Look, I've been around a lot of minority governments. In fact, most of my career covering federal politics has been around minority governments, and you never know how long they're going to last. But you're right, it was a bit of a, what do they call it, a Freudian slip? He just kind of let slip that, well, Bill Moore, no, he left. He was looking towards the election next year, and whoa, and he kind of caught himself. Did I say election next year? Possible election next year? Simple fact of the matter is we don't know. There's been a lot of talk that the Trudeau Liberals would like to go to the polls. We knew that at one point they wanted to go to the polls in the fall. Then cases started to rise, and they had been talking about doing all these things to revamp the Canadian economy, to use the throne speech, to completely reshape the way the country operates. And Canadians went, whoa, wait a minute. We've got a pandemic going on, focus on that. So they kind of backed off. Then, how are things going on the vaccines? It didn't look good. Now it might look better. So do they want to go? Do the Liberals want to go in the spring? Do the opposition parties want to go? Here's what I can tell you, Hal. After covering the Paul Martin minority government, 2 Stephen Harper minority governments, and now the Trudeau minority government, we will not know until a week or so before. You will start to see trends moving in that direction, but you will not fully know until the vote comes. Because I remember sitting there in 2005 thinking we were going to an election that day, and a vote went, just by one vote, went the other direction. So it's going to be very difficult. You're going to have a lot of pundits, people like myself, people like yourself, saying we're going one way or the other. We don't know. But obviously, an election is on the Prime Minister's mind.
You know what? I think it's on a lot of Canadians' minds, especially with all of the handouts. When it comes to aid, when it comes to COVID-19 and helping a lot of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. So maybe he's thinking, you know what? A few more goodies I'm going to give up before the election. We'll see what happens. Brian, sadly though, unfortunately, a lot of Canadians are struggling with their bills right now due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Many people are working from home. But you recently reported on the fact that more than 50 bureaucrats or civil servants we've never heard of actually have chauffeurs who pick them up and drop them off at work.
Yeah, can you believe that there are more bureaucrats with chauffeurs than there are cabinet ministers? So there are 53, and this is from government documents. They had to table this in the House of Commons after an order paper question from Alberta Conservative MP Chris Workington. He asked, well, how many people have this? Turns out it's 53. Now that's less than there used to be, but it's still more than there are cabinet ministers. These are deputy ministers, the chief of the defense staff, people that you might say, well, maybe they could have it, maybe they couldn't. But let me ask you this. Hal, can you tell me who the Superintendent of Financial Services of Canada is? Well, what about the President of the Public Service Commission of Canada? Or the President of the Social Services and Humanities
Wait a minute,
Council?
that one I got that. No, I don't. Sorry. Go
Now,
ahead.
you don't know any of these people. Unless you're related to them, you probably don't know their name. Even if you work for them, you might be like, oh yeah, my boss. I'm not sure. but they have a car and driver. And I'm not talking about someone that they, a car service that they call up, like a government Uber. No, this is a dedicated full-time chauffeur that picks them up at their house in the morning, drops them off at work, and then waits for them to want to go somewhere else. It's bad enough that we have this for 35 cabinet ministers. We've got it for 53 different bureaucrats, and bureaucrats that, most of whom you couldn't pick out. Britain years ago decided that they were going to get rid of this, except for people that needed it for security reasons and the like. We've still got it for every cabinet minister. In the middle of this pandemic, when we've got small businesses shut down, Mary Ain, the Minister for Small Business, has a car and driver full time. That makes zero sense, but it also makes zero sense that all these bureaucrats have it as well.
Brian, Alberta's top doctor, Dr. Deanie Henshaw, has allegedly given her blessing, saying that NHL teams are free to play in our province here in Alberta. But Ontario, they're sitting on the fence, and BC is against it. Will we see a return to play? And if so, maybe it'll be back in Edmonton in another bubble, perhaps?
Yeah, okay, so here's a couple of things going on. We know that Deanie Henshaw, the Chief Medical Officer for Alberta, has said, yes, you're fine to play. It's a little bit surprising because Alberta is one of the highest in the country when it comes to active cases per 100,000. Alberta has gone through the roof after, doing very well in the first wave, not doing well in the second wave. British Columbia, which is at about half the rate of active cases per 100,000, is said to be on the fence, and they may not allow the Canucks to play in Vancouver with teams visiting from other parts of the country. As you know, the NHL has, as part of their return to play, has said, we're going to have 4 different divisions. One of them will be a Canadian division. And so these Canadian teams can't cross the border. Once the players are in, they're in, and they're just going to play each other for the regular season. It's going to be a bit strange, but that requires the federal government to sign off on it. We don't know where they're going to come down, but it also requires each of the provinces to sign off. Alberta is at this point for sure. Quebec and Ontario, we don't know. Manitoba, given their case counts, they're unlikely, and British Columbia is said to be wavering after initially supporting it. So we're going to be waiting on tenterhooks for a little while to find out, because we're looking at January 13th as the opening. That means players have to be in place for training camp shortly after Christmas, and we don't know if this is going to go ahead. If it doesn't go ahead, we could see Edmonton and Toronto being bubble cities as they were before. We could just see Edmonton or Toronto being bubble cities, or one or two of the teams moving, depending on what their provincial officials say.
Ontario is going into a massive lockdown just after Christmas on December 26th. Now, why is Premier Doug Ford locking down the entire province, Brian, when he should really be focusing on some of the red zones? I mean, I've read comments, I've talked to people in Northern Ontario, they say, cases are a lot lower here. We're not Toronto, and they're pretty upset about it.
Look, I've been arguing against lockdown since the spring. However, what I can tell you as far as the government's thinking on this goes is that when they have tried the regional approach, what they have seen is that people simply move from one region to the next. And so there's a lot of focus, let's say, on Ottawa, where you and I used to live, where you and I met. And Ottawa, they say, well, we're doing very well and our numbers are low and we don't have to worry. Well, Quebec is about to lock down. Ottawa sits on the Ontario-Quebec border. The city of Ottawa is about 1 million people. Gatineau is about 250,000 across the river. They have a much higher case count across the river. They're worried about people just saying, you know what? The restaurants, the bars, the shopping, it's all closed in Quebec. We're going to Ottawa. That could easily happen. And also, they say the numbers are spiking in the wrong direction in Ottawa at the moment. So the Ontario government's thinking is lock everything down, and within 2 to 4 weeks, start opening up across the province on a much smaller scale. Rather than regional, it will be across the province. And much like Alberta's done with, 15 or 20 or 25% of fire code capacity, it could be something like that, where they say, all right, you can all open up now, but within limited capacity. Nobody has a great roadmap on this. I will say this, among the major provinces, not counting Atlantic Canada, and across North America and Western Europe, Ontario is actually doing better when it comes to active cases per 100,000 across Canada. When it comes to deaths per 100,000, Ontario is doing very well compared to any comparable jurisdiction, despite having some of the toughest rules, despite having what its critics say are not rules that are tough enough.
And Brian, let's just pray that these lockdowns don't last too long because it is killing our small business owners. Political reporter Brian Lilley joining me once again from Toronto. Brian, have yourself a merry little Christmas.
And you, Hal. Merry Christmas to you and all your viewers.